Within the college teaching responsibility, using assessments is necessary to make sure that our students are meeting the student learning outcomes. But as we'll discuss in this presentation, there are a number of ways that you can go about this assessment process. So by the end of this presentation, you'll be able to identify common types of assessment and discuss best practices for creating and giving tests, which are a very common form of assessment. We will also differentiate among various types of test questions. So in the beginning of the course, we talked about the idea of backward course design, where you start with your learning outcomes, then determine how you'll assess the learning, and then you'll plan that learning experience. And right here in the middle is where we are. We need to be able to determine how we will assess our learning to make sure that we are then creating the learning experience for that purpose. So think about your own college courses. What were the different assignments or tests that you had to complete to show that you were making progress, that you were learning, that you were able to demonstrate the student learning outcomes? So those are what we would call types of assessment. So common types of assessment are tests. I have exams on here twice, excuse that typo. But tests are exams and quizzes, typically more objective forms of assessment where there's an answered key. We'll talk more about constructed response assessments that are more subjective. That is where assignments, projects, presentations, maybe some in-class activities fall. And this may not be an exhaustive list. Perhaps you thought of others that would fall into this area. But when you think about your courses, one of the things I didn't have on here is participation. So maybe, or, regular attendance. So there's different things that we can do to assess our students' performance in a class. And some of these, as we'll discuss up here on the top of this list, fall under that more objective sort of assessment. And then we're going to talk more in an upcoming lecture about these that require a little more subjective evaluation. So when you're designing tests, you need to consider which student learning outcomes you're measuring and align the assessment to those. I think nothing frustrates students more than saying, I didn't know that was going to be on the test. So making it clear what will be tested and then determining the best ways to assess students' learning. So are you going to test more short-term memory skills, so recall of vocabulary, matching key facts, knowing the chronological order of things? Or do you want them to be able to exhibit higher order thinking skills such as analysis, synthesis, and evaluation? And depending on this, then you can construct your test. As we've discussed, there are some best practices for testing, and letting our students know how to study aligns with some of these best practices for tests. In the classes you offer, you should test early and often. I also think this allows you for students not to have a single point of failure, that if they mess up one time or bomb a test or miss a quiz, they can make that up. When you're writing test questions, you should do this as you create your lesson plan and immediately after you cover the material. That makes sure that you're testing what you have taught. Sample content appropriately. This means if you spent a week on a topic and, compared to 15 minutes one day, that you should probably have more questions about the week-long topic than something you address very quickly in a portion of the class. Your instructions should be detailed, and hopefully you can provide some of that instruction ahead of time so students know what to expect. The book says to start the test with some warm-up questions so that students can gain confidence, maybe a few easier questions. You should proofread the test for errors. It's going to happen, and you can invite students to let you know if they noticed an error. Perhaps you are using an answer key and you have the wrong answer selected. You could have a colleague review the test for clarity and content. Many textbooks also will have test banks and questions that you can pull from. I don't use that kind of textbook, but I know others have done that to build their test bank. And sometimes that allows you to do this item analysis so that you can see which items students are missing more frequently, and look for ways to adjust that. I think there's a lot of work that goes into developing a good test, and to be honest, I don't use them very often because most of the work I want students to demonstrate can't be assessed through an objective multiple choice or true-false exam. But for many classes, it's the best way to assess learning and to motivate students to learn the material. So when you're constructing a test, there are many different test question items you can use. And these are the ones mentioned in the book. And you can see they're probably familiar to you. You've probably taken a test or two in your college career that has used a variety of these test questions. So what I'd like you to do for the second topic in this week's discussion post is to review the advice in the book regarding advantages, disadvantages, and how to construct these various items. I don't want you to have to list something for all of these, but I do want you to review them and identify 10 things you learned about writing test questions. So those 10 things could be in the matching and multiple choice area, or the short answer and essay, or you can pick, one or two for each of these areas. But when you look through that list of things you should consider when writing test questions, what are 10 things that stood out to you that you'll keep in mind the next time you need to write a test or an exam? One of the other benefits of these assessments and identifying quickly, through a test or an exam where students are doing well and where they're not, is that you can make teaching adjustments. So you can ask yourself these questions to identify things that you might need to emphasize more, or perhaps even reassure students that they're doing well. Can you get a sense that students aren't really doing the reading, and maybe you need to incorporate a compliance incentive or comprehension exercise to make sure they're doing that? Maybe there were some teaching methods or moves you were using that weren't as effective as others. Maybe students needed more time to practice and to review the material. There's a number of questions here that you could ask yourself after you see the results of these assessments. So in review, we can select from a variety of assessments to evaluate students' learning. But these should measure what students have learned, not just what they can recall. When you're developing tests specifically, they should be constructed thoughtfully and evaluated to ensure they're measuring what you need to measure. And these assessments can be used to identify areas of necessary adjustment when teaching. So this video focused on testing and writing questions for exams. In the next video, we're going to talk about other areas of assessment that can use a variety of approaches for grading.